Thank you, everybody, for joining us from the Center for Women at the American College for our August webcast, How to Attract Gen Z Talent to Financial Services. I am joined by my esteemed colleagues, Lindsey Lewis and Kaylee Ranck, and you're going to hear a lot from both of them today about some primary research that we did to find out what Gen Z talent want and need and expect in careers and jobs in financial services. So here is our save the date. We had an amazing first summit, Women Working in Wealth Summit last year in New York. We are in the process of planning our second, which is going to be just as fabulous, maybe even more fabulous, March 7th and 8th, 2023 in New York at the Convene location. If you were there, you know it. If you weren't, you want to be. So we're going to open registration in December, and we hope to see you there. All right, now we're going to get down to it. We're going to talk to Gen Z. Extra points for everybody who can recognize anybody on this screen. But don't worry, if you don't know everybody on the screen, you don't have to. You're still going to learn a lot during this webcast, even if you can't name everybody on this screen. So just to set the stage a little bit, we'll tell you when we talk about Gen Z. So just to set the stage, we are using the definition for Gen Z as people being born between the years of 1997 and 2012. That's a Pew Research definition, just to set the table there. What we know about Gen Z, they account for roughly nearly a third of the US population. These are digital natives. These young people were born into technology. They're more technology advanced than any other generation. They possess more high school and postgraduate degrees than any previous generation. They expect improved mental health awareness and support in workplaces. They may not necessarily want to talk about it all the time, but they want to know that it's there and that it's okay to talk about it. And this next bullet point, more individualistic and less social. I want you to know that individualistic in this case is not a bad word. It has no negative connotation. What it really means is that Gen Z does things individually differently on their own. So they learn differently. They learn individually. They express themselves individually. They socialize differently their way. And so that's going to be an important theme. And you're going to hear a lot about that throughout the webcast today and why it matters. And because they're so technology advanced and more individualistic, they're less social. They're less social than we would think. They're the most diverse generation ever. And they also have a need to feel socially supported at work. So not just we're colleagues, but I want you to ask me about my day. I want you to care about me a little bit or show that you care about me. So they're highly connected, they use tech to communicate more than any other generation, do a lot of things themselves, kind of back to that individualistic note that we made, and more entrepreneurial. So they like to do things for themselves and by themselves. They have a kind of a short attention span. So you may have noticed that a lot of social media has distilled things to bite-sized pieces. That's because they're trying to reach Gen Z, who are a pretty formidable generation you'll hear about. They're very skilled in social media channels. They care about the ethical values of companies. They expect honesty, and they want a fair salary, a fair market salary. And it's very important to them. They want to talk about it, and it's an expectation. It's not, you can't get over on this generation as far as salaries. They do the research, they look at all the websites, they talk to other people, and so you need to be prepared to talk about it. So social activism is a core value for Gen Z. They want work-life balance, and I think, you know, coming through a pandemic, I think that's hugely common these days. They're more worried about the future, again, given, you know, the times that they lived in, and they want to be recognized and rewarded for their performance. So why does this matter? Lindsey is going to talk about why this matters.
When we look at Gen Z and what we can consider an impending hiring crisis within financial services. So the industry at large, we're trying to attract next-gen talent, Gen Z being a part of this. This statistic from RIA Intel shows that 37% of advisors are expected to retire in the next decade. That's $10 trillion of assets that are going to need to be managed by someone. When you also layer in our data from our white paper, The Future Client is Female, where you'll see another 30 trillion transitioning to the hands of women, this crisis and need for hiring is more important than ever. Also from RIA Intel, in 2020, the amount of advisors only increased 0.1% to just north of 290,000 financial professionals. Then when we look at the forecast by year 2023, so next year, they're expected to have a decline of financial advisors and professionals, as well as a continuing decline through 2025. So definitely more important than ever. Additionally, when we look at the CFP Board of Standards, they have more CFP professionals over the age of 70 than under the age of 30. Also, the younger generation isn't feeling like the older generation is understanding their values, their perceptions, and what they want in a workplace. Another interesting statistic here that keeps building the case of our recruiting, it shows that only 10% of advisors are under age 35. And even with our current efforts to recruit younger advisors, it hasn't yielded the talent that we're looking for. And that was kind of the inception and reasoning behind the research pilot that we did. What are we doing right? How could we change this? How could we make adjustments? But I'm curious for those of you in the audience, we're going to take a quick poll to see how many people in your firm or what percentage of your firm are at different age demographics. So we'll just launch that poll real quickly. Okay, so what percentage of your firm is under age 35? As you can see, we have those different varying options there. So we'll just give you a couple of minutes as we go through this poll question. Okay. Looks like we get some, here are the results. Populate on your percent. Okay, so we're falling in line with the industry at large, right? Majority are going to be less than 40 to less than 10% are next gen, or Gen Z, or millennial advisors. And so this continues to stress the importance of adopting younger next gen advisors into our practices. Here's the business case, right? We've heard this many different diversity D&I webcasts, but next gen and Gen Z in particular, you know, we do digital, they are digital, right? So they provide a level of innovation, increased productivity, very diverse in thought, and there's a changing consumer demographic, right? We are going to be a minority majority by the year 2050. You see more next gen and generational wealth happening. And so we have this changing consumer demographic, and this was, like I mentioned, the inception of us going through this research pilot, which Kaylee is going to share a little bit more about what we did in our pilot.
Great, thank you. I just want to say, Hilary and Lindsey, thank you so much for kind of setting the stage for the reasoning why we even considered doing Gen Z research pilot. As we kind of embarked on deciding whether or not this was a relevant research topic, we of course looked at all the previous data and research that had been put out there. And as we can see, there is a need for industry to replace retiring individuals, and that either is going to happen with new talent or career changers. And given the fact that, as Lindsey had stated, there's a business case for hiring Gen Z. And so we looked at all of the information and kind of the characteristics that have been found through large survey data predominantly. And Hilary kind of formalized and went through that pretty clearly in terms of what we were seeing about the characteristics of Gen Z. What we found, though, is that there was this missing hole in terms of the research and the data. We didn't really know anything about individuals who are in finance or considering the financial services sector, and specifically what they may need in terms of their position or being attracted to a particular firm or staying within the industry. And then also what that would mean specifically for females. You know, we are a center for women, and the idea around what we're doing is to recruit, retain, and advance women within the financial services sector. And we are doing that through research and education. And so to stay true to our mission, we decided to do this research project, and we had the assistance of two really amazing women who unfortunately could not be on this call today, but we had the opportunity to have two interns who interned with us, Erin and Faith, and they worked closely with our team in helping design and conduct this research pilot. And I think that this is relevant because of some of the findings that you will hear, in that Gen Z desperately wants to be part of a team. They need a team to grow. They need mentors. And similarly to what both Hilary and Lindsey addressed, they want to feel as though they're cared about within their firm and in their position. And so what we did is we did do formal interviews. We utilized all the previous research and constructed interview questions and met with 15 individuals who provided amazing content and information for this study. And some of the findings that I want to address today, really, we have lots of findings. There was some amazing information throughout all of these interviews, but I'm going to focus for the purpose of time on things that then we are going to share how to utilize this information in maybe adjusting recruitment and hiring practices, or ways to do more outreach to reach more Gen Z, and certainly perhaps, you know, open up the industry to Gen Z if they are unaware that, you know, it does have so many benefits as a career. So the findings that I want to address are that all of our participants stated that they wanted to work in a collaborative environment and not a competitive environment. And the reason this is interesting is when we get to the perceptions, we did ask them. Hilary alluded to their ideas around work, their perceptions around work. I asked specifically what their perception about careers in the financial services sector. And I think their responses are telling in terms of maybe why, when Lindsey stated that the recruitment efforts are not working, I think there might be a perception incongruency between what the industry is trying to say and then what's being heard and understood. So the next thing I want to address is that they really do want a safe place to grow professionally. And I think this comes down to some of the things around they're a whole person. This is a generation that different than their previous generations. They did not grow up working like summer high school jobs. They often were involved in extracurricular activities. They were seeking educational pursuits. And so their full work experience starting out looks different than previous generations, and kind of their understanding of what perhaps working in a team and in a group looks like. Their knowledge is either through an internship or through an educational experience. The next thing is that I want to address this environment that supports diversity. When our respondents talked about diversity, they talked about it in two different ways. One being that they do want the level of individualism for themselves, but also their peers. So if their peers identify as a they, them, they want that to be respected, understood, and not judged in the workplace. They also want to be able to dress the way that they feel comfortable in, knowing, and again, knowing that there is a professional approach that they need to do. And so it's not as though they want this rogue environment, but that there's a level of authenticity and self. The other part to diversity is that they want to see diversity in racial hires, so racial diversity among hires, and also age diversity among hires, mostly because there's a sense of community and being part of the team. In addition to that, when they talked about wanting diversity and to see diversity, they don't want to just see it in the pictures. They don't want to see that there's only a person in charge of DE&I efforts, but they want to see that the firm or the employer that has committed to programming around promotional attainment for diverse individuals and support systems that allow them to flourish and succeed. And so I think that that's an important component to know about Gen Z. And then also that they want to be seen as a whole person, as I've addressed in different factions among the findings. So with that, I do think this is really important because again, this comes back to that congruency issue. So when I asked the individuals about what they felt about the industry, and again, these are individuals who are considering a career in financial services sector, some of which are on the job market for a career in the financial services sector, but some of them have taken courses in personal finance and are interested. But when they describe their perception is that there's like this plethora of money out there, that they can just garner a ton of wealth. However, they also see that as meaning they have to give up their time, that they will be thoroughly stressed out and their mental health is not protected. And that when they talk about money, they talk about it in a way where they want to feel solvent and a sense of well-being. The other piece is that there's no flexibility within the industry, that it is an 8 to 5 or 9 to 5 position, that you do sit at a desk, and that firms are, although COVID happened, that there's going to be an expectation that they sit in an office, and that is the long-term expectation. They also saw that industry is rigid and stiff, that there's this expectation about clothing, that you wear a suit every day to work, that you have to present in a very specific way that is not necessarily authentic to them, and then that it's intimidating. And I kind of want to address this piece because I did ask, like, please explain what you mean by intimidating. So the beauty of being able to interview people rather than a survey is you get to investigate a little further on their responses. And so I said, please describe intimidating for me. Like, what do you mean by this? And what I found is that for several of our respondents who are either first-gen college students, identify as a person of color, they said that the reason it's intimidating is because many of them, regardless of background or racial identification, they identify the industry as for kind of a homogenous group and for people with money. And one of those factors is that many of them don't see this as an opportunity where they can impact generational wealth. And so there's this teetering point around the intimidation factor, that there's not a space for that. And so I think that that's important when we're talking about messaging and communicating with prospective future employees. So without further ado, I am going to go ahead and we're going to show you what some of the interview responses look like. We want to introduce you to 3 of our participants. Again, these were anonymous interviews, so any identifying factors for these individuals has been removed, but I hope that you enjoy their responses.
Priya, 19-year-old female college freshman, is currently undecided on a specific major, but values collaborative work environments, learning, and family. Her family immigrated to the United States. She hopes to find a career that helps people, values her as a whole person, has a work-life balance, and provides financial stability. So, can you describe for me the skills that you think are essential for successful future employment?
I think a lot of soft skills are essential, just because I think a lot of those are gained through experience, not through just sitting in a classroom and learning them, which is why I value experience a lot more than class, even though education is important. But I think hands-on education, where you're immersed in the environment in which you want to work in the future, is what helps students the most. I think things like communication, time management, collaborating with others, and just other soft skills where you know how to interact with people, that's really going to get you far. I think what's really going to distinguish you from other applicants in a job is that you have soft skills and you're able to connect with different people, because that's what's going to move the company forward.
Please describe what your future ideal company culture would look and feel like.
I want a friendly company culture. I definitely don't want a competitive culture. I would rather like a more collaborative culture here where I'm learning from my colleagues and from the people that I work with, and where I feel like I can talk to them and I can go to them to get help, rather than being like, oh no, I don't know how to do this, I need to figure it out on my own, otherwise I'll look bad.
What are the ideal values you would want to see in your employer?
I would want an employer who I can look up to for inspiration and who can teach me along the way, and kind of who encourages me to grow rather than just stay stagnant, so I can stay in their company. I want an employer who invests in their employees and someone who's very understanding of the fact that their employees are genuine people with families and with other things to do, rather than just robots who only do things for them.
Maria, 23-year-old female graduate student in financial planning. She values her faith, family, and having purpose in her future career. Maria is bilingual and sees this as a benefit for future working relationships. She prefers collaborative work environments, professional networking, and seeks mentorship opportunities. Please describe your ideal company culture.
One that is collaborative, knowing that you can cheer someone else moving up, even if it's not you yet. Knowing that it's not competitive, but collaborative. The type of mindset, when you can ask what we can be doing better on. One that the higher executive leadership board communicates with the rest of its employees. And if someone needs to meet with one of them, they'll make the time for that. But through networking, you can easily connect with someone within the firm. Having a growth mindset. How are they going to supplement their employees, gain more education, and where they help cover the costs?
Please describe what values you'd like your employer to have.
That they acknowledge the trends already within the industry, and that you can feel they acknowledge the need to better equip women and for diversifying its employees. Also, they value growth opportunities, support supplemental programs, and conferences.
Morgan, this 22-year-old just completed her degree this year and is looking for employment. She has completed 2 internships and has valuable work experience. She plans to take her time finding the right professional fit and is interviewing at multiple businesses. She wants a flexible work environment that is supportive of her growth and future progression. Please describe what your ideal work environment looks like.
For me, the most important thing is a really great team. That's being in a group of people who are very supportive, helping me in my career. People who can act in mentor type positions, where there's open and honest communication about the support that I need in my position, what I want to do as I continue to grow in my career and progress. Definitely a team environment, also opportunities for growth, like knowing that there's clear ways I can advance in my career and flexibility. And having an environment where the people are like accepting of me as a whole person.
Please describe your ideal company culture.
I think racial and personal identity diversity is definitely very important to me. Being in a place where not everyone looks the same and grew up the same way, a place that's fun. I love when it doesn't have to be like 100% business all the time. We can have group chats where we send memes to remember that people are people and being able to interact. Even though you may not be friends with your coworkers, but to be friendly with the people you work with is always important to me.
Great. Well, I hope I did see the note about the music being slightly distracting. Again, thank you for bearing with us. We were kind of getting that pulled together, and we did just test the music on it today, so I apologize. But I hope that we'll go through each of the individuals just briefly, because I want to be respectful of time, and we have some really great content coming up. So to recap, Priya really did talk about how experiences, in fact, benefit her and, in theory, others more in terms of business and understanding how to do a job well than the theoretical kind of educational component. And that's interesting given the fact that this generation is the most highly educated generation to date. And so we spent all this time educating individuals, and then we're having Gen Z individuals really communicate about how they need the experience now. They have all the kind of technical knowledge, but they need the support and the development. And so the highlights I want to get back to is this communication piece, in that Gen Z is really open to having full communication. And I think that one of the things that came up is asking about, what do you mean by communication and what do you mean by feedback? And so the idea is that they are open to feedback. I think there's probably some level of nuance on how well that is. And somebody asked a question about educated to date and how that's measured. And so the Pew Research study that came out measured it utilizing, like formal educational attainment. But what we do know about this generation is they also had a lot of extracurricular educational attainments. But yes, it's the highest educated in that the majority went on and had post-secondary education. Great. And that back to Priya, she also addressed some kind of soft skills that some people have and don't have. And it's certainly not something that's necessarily taught in an educational space. However, I do think that Gen Z has established and learned how to manage their time. And certainly they really want to work collaboratively. For a generation that we identify as being essentially solo, they do want to work collaboratively. So the next is Maria. And I think this really gets back to my point about one of the majority findings about diversity and the importance of diversity and what that means to Gen Z. And certainly, I think that this idea around that the employer invest in diversity and also growth for their employees, especially when they first start out. And so a couple of the things I want to address from the highlights of her her interview is that prior to previous generations, we saw it a little bit with like millennials. I remember reading an article about millennials going to work and how their bosses didn't really understand the fact that they would just walk in their office and start asking them questions because the sense of hierarchy looked different. I would think that this is actually very similar. And Maria is not the only one who communicated that the communication that they want is with their higher ups. And in previous generations, there's a hierarchy. And the idea that that exists is a little more foreign for Gen Z. And so as you're recruiting, thinking about the communication and that expectation as a factor, and certainly because they identify as change agents, and they see that if they can communicate with executives, there's this idea that they can grow quicker and there can be like change and development at a much faster pace. And then Morgan, again, we're back to the communication. So we're seeing some really important themes in terms of Gen Z, and I think this is relevant when it comes to hiring. So if this is what they expect, the hiring process needs to have almost constant communication. And this is a generation that is used to having immediate response, like DM me, and if you do not DM me back, I can see that you're online right now. So don't pretend like you didn't get it. I can even see that you saw, that you read it. So the big thing here is communication. And then I think from Morgan's, that's really important, and this was consistent across the interviewees, is that they really do need mentorship. And arguably, I would say that that's one, like our research and previous research shows that mentorship is one of the key factors, one, in retaining quality employees. And certainly mentoring and sponsoring females or people of color in terms of getting to the next, like promotional attainment. And so I think that Morgan's comments are really important about having that present. And then I think too, the idea around this growth, I want to address that really quickly before we move on to the next thing. And that is this generation who has like everything right there, technology based, which is such an incredible gift, but they want to see that there is a level of growth and promotional opportunities, but they want to see what it looks like. They want to see some framework of what they need to do to get to the next step. And so being clear and concise and deliberate about the language of what that stepping ladder looks like is important to this generation.
So before we get into the now what, we had a couple comments in the Q&A, and I want to thank Carol for bringing your recruiter. You understood the assignment, Carol. Thank you for bringing your recruiter to the webcast today. And we also had a question from Kevin, who asked, sounds like it might be difficult to recruit Gen Z to a small boutique practice with only one or two other associates to collaborate with. Is this a fair takeaway? And what I would say is, I think if you apply some of what we've talked about transparency, leading the way, caring about, showing that you care, embracing the whole authentic person, I think that, you know, and Rachel's commenting as well, if you show interest, care about your employees, ask where they want to go, show them the path there, be open to when they pop into your office, even if they don't have an appointment with you. I think even in a small group environment, you could have success. And if I said anything wrong, Kaylee, feel free to jump in.
No, I think that sums it up. And I think it comes down to being very clear about what your firm and like you as an individual and as a mentor can provide. And honestly, I would actually argue that they would be just as interested in working in a small environment as long as it was collaborative as opposed to a large environment.
So if you know anything about us at the college, we are all about applied knowledge. We don't do research for research's sake. We don't do thought leadership for thought leadership's sake. We don't do anything to sit on a shelf. So we want to take what we've talked about today and make it actionable for all of you on the phone. So we're going to tell you how to apply what we've heard today to recruit and retain talent. One of the things that can be a challenge or an obstacle to attracting Gen Z talent are the job descriptions. And every now and then we go in and we look at job descriptions. And we did research prior to this called the Traits of Successful Advisors. And 60% of all 800 people who we interviewed, men and women, said that they were in this business to serve. And we look through job descriptions all the time, and they don't highlight the service aspect. There are terms in there like unlimited income potential and other value proposition, descriptions, but we rarely see service. And so if you want to connect with Gen Z in your job descriptions, try to work that in. We're in the business to serve and to help people. This next one is so critically important. This generation has not yet aged off their parents' benefits. And in all likelihood, they don't know what benefits they have. They don't know what they need. They don't know how much it costs. They don't know what a plan is. They don't know what a copay is. They need to have that explained to them. We talked about flexibility in their work schedule. To the extent that you can allow flexibility, that is huge. Gen Z may not operate on the same timetable as we do. They'll put in a full day's worth of work, or they'll work smarter, but they feel differently than some of us more mature people about the workday schedule, and they really look for flexibility. The other thing that we do that can turn off Gen Z talent is to use our industry jargon, our secret language. And, when you're coming into this industry and you don't know, you spend so much time just trying to figure out what people are talking about. Take it down. Don't use acronyms. Use just mainstream words, and it will go a long way with Gen Z talent. And lastly, have clear salary transparency. They're going to talk about it. They're going to talk about it to each other. They're going to talk about it to other people. They have no reservation about talking about it. So you need to be upfront and talk about it. Again, they have the expectation that we're in an industry where we just mint money. So you have to be prepared to have that conversation. This next slide, everybody probably knows what unconscious bias is, and it's having a preconceived notion about somebody and acting on that assumption, even if it isn't true. If you're going to be recruiting, developing, and retaining Gen Z talent, you need to acknowledge your unconscious bias and you need to deal with it, because this is Gen Z, and they told us in their own words what they want us to do, what they want us to know about hiring them, recruiting them, retaining them. They want us to meet them where they are. So Kaylee talked, about meeting them in their footprint, about who they trust for getting information, their career services folks, their faculty, their friends and family. They want to be authentic. They want to look like this young lady right here. They want you to present a diverse organization, get rid of the industry jargon, encourage team environment and mentoring, and be clear about compensation and salary. So now I'm going to put this on you. I'm going to ask all of you. If someone like this young lady here were to present at your organization for a job and they were qualified, would you hire her? So now we're going to go to a poll. Do you think your firm values hiring authentic Gen Z talent? The choices are yes, yes with the understanding that some situations may call for some compromise, or no. And please be honest, this is anonymous. We won't know who you are, but we're trying to gauge where we are right now. That's why we did the research. That's why we did this pilot. And we will continue to pursue this path. All right, we'll just see what the results are. All right, so we're kind of in the middle. We gave you a caveat and you all took it. So yes, with the understanding that some situations may call for compromise. I think it's fair, and I think that Gen Z recognizes and acknowledges and is okay with, if a client comes to the office, we're going to do something different. We're, not going to sit on the floor, or we're going to, take out your nose ring, or whatever it may be, or wear a suit. There may be some compromise that you can come to mutually with your Gen Z talent about what is, while still being authentic, what is acceptable in a client meeting. So thank you for participating in that poll. Okay, sorry, I jumped ahead. Kaylee's gonna tell us where we can find candidates. Sorry, I stole some thunder there.
Oh no, that's all right. So that was great actually about the poll, because we had 17%, nearly like 1 in 5 say that they're not in a position to be attracting Gen Z. And I do want to address just a couple of quick questions. So we did not specifically ask them what they mean by professionalism. When I asked them what their ideal workplace looked like, what I did find is that they naturally communicated this idea that they wanted to be able to have days where they were in their own kind of clothing and didn't necessarily have to adhere to kind of a strict dress code that would be more common in the financial services sector. And so I didn't ask about professionalism per se, but there is a natural understanding that presentation of self in a professional environment may look slightly different than the authentic self, but they want to know that their whole person can show up to work. That old adage, like leave all of you and your problems at the door before you walk into work. They do not adhere to that. And so I think that that's the factor. That's kind of the difference between the level of professionalism that maybe other people subscribe to, that they just generally don't, because of how everything is open on social media. And so I think it is very different. They have a whole persona that they want to bring.
It's interesting, Kaylee, there was a comment in the Q&A about the hesitancy to put someone authentic in front of a client, because the fear was that the client would not trust them. And we had this conversation when we were building the poll, and that was going to be one of the selections. And so it's interesting that came up in the chat. That we assumed that that's what's holding us back. It's all about the client reaction.
So I think that that's exactly what it is. And there's a lot of relevant and nuances behind that. And that is an important weighing option when you're talking about hiring Gen Z or taking on new talent. and certainly, weighing what is most important, and that is what we have heard, and that includes language choices, they, them. I even get pushback when I, in a survey, have a selection for non-binary. And so I do think that there's certainly, that's completely valid. And then I think someone's, like posting some really important kind of also commentary about these things. The other component, sorry, I just lost my train of thought. So maybe I will come back to that. I am going to talk here a little bit about one of the things I asked all of our participants is, where are you looking for jobs? And how are you finding information? And so I'm thinking they're going to respond like, oh, I was on TikTok and I found so-and-so, and I was like on Instagram and, this influencer. No, they said 85% of them said that they either found a friend or family member if they had a natural network, as in they knew somebody who was within the industry. But a large portion of them are interested because of or looking for work through their faculty and or their career services centers at their institutions. And what is interesting about that is when we did some previous research, we found that that was actually not as useful in terms of recruiting. But so I asked them further, like, can you explain this to me? And for individuals who are first generation or do not come from networks of friends and family where there is like an extensive amount of wealth, and they're the people they trust in terms of their professional trajectory is their faculty members and their career services centers. So it's not about a career fair. It's more about communicating specifically with someone within industry. And that has to do a little bit with what they repeated, that I want to know that I can ask questions and that they're hearing me. And so one of the things around faculty is, if any of the people in this room are associated with their institution or whatever, and we have so many tools that you don't have to recreate all of this, and Lindsey will communicate a little bit about that here in a second, but that utilizing, if you're interested in recruiting Gen Z, is communicating with your alma maters, communicating with the local colleges, community colleges, anything, faculty, and then also opting in to go to their career centers and saying, hey, I'm willing to put in an hour presentation, and or I am willing, if someone comes in is slightly interested in this field, it's a relationship field. I think that in general, Gen Z doesn't understand the relationship. When we talked about perception, it was very incongruent with really what the industry is about. And so for them, they're not using LinkedIn in the same way, unless they had formal training on how to utilize or communicate through LinkedIn. They are not using it in the same way that you would anticipate the I generation to use. And so that is where there's a level of incongruency between them seeking employment. They do use all of the Indeed and Glassdoor. And I actually want to just make a quick comment about what Hilary said about the salary piece. What I found when they talked about compensation, when I just asked about, so tell me about your, like, what would be an important part of your compensation package? Most of them, all of them said, I want to be paid equitably, like fair market value, really. And I said, so explain, are there any other things you need or want as part of, an agreement that you sign on to with this company? And quite honestly, they had no idea. They had no idea about vacation time, expectations around PTO, whether or not it included health insurance. And as Hilary mentioned, they're not in a position to be even needing to select health insurance. And then on top of that, I think someone in the chat had made a comment about commissions. And that's an interesting component. And that's why the transparency is so important. So offline, because I didn't want to bias their responses, I did ask. So this is not formally part of the research, but the more it's anecdotal. Most of them didn't really understand what it would be like to work under a full commission position. And so what, in a way, that signals to me is that if they're applying for jobs that are fully commission based, but yet their expectation is that they're going to have some level of financial solvency and well-being within the first 3 to 5 years. And also this generation is taking out student loans, like they have immediate bills. And so, well, they may starting in September, but one of the things is that they don't know. And that's why it's so important on the transparency side, both for the recruitment and certainly for retention.
Okay, to wrap this up, we're going to go back to one of our personas. So we have Maria here, and Maria has had an opportunity to be and participate in many internships, but she was really looking for a woman that had similar lived experience as her. You know, as a bilingual student, she was looking for a bilingual advisor. And it wasn't until she found a value-based firm where they were able to introduce her to her mentor, where she was able to really see herself in this career as a long-term trajectory and goal for her, which is part of the Center for Women's social media campaign, See Her, Be Her. So we've all heard the adage, you know, if you can see it, you can be it. But we really are advocating for all of our women and our allies to be in those places so that these Gen Z women and men can see what it's like to be in this industry. So it is very, very important. As the team members mentioned, we want to make this as easy for you. We know that your time is limited, and so we have developed a number of resources. So I did see a comment in the chat around mentorship and kind of Morgan's clarity of what mentorship looks like. And when we look at mentorship, people want to look at their current situation as well as, you know, project into the future of what they can attain. So we have developed a toolkit, and you can download it, and it gives you best practices of how to be a good mentor, but also best practices for how to be a good mentee. Additionally, it provides role clarity around what it means to be a mentor versus a sponsor versus an ally versus a champion, because those words get used all over the industry without a congruent definition. One thing that is absolutely huge, and all these resources will be dropped into the chat, is we have created a careers presentation for you. So if you want to be that boots on the ground, going out to your alma mater, universities, colleges, high schools, wherever, Girl Scouts, but you're unsure of the time commitment of creating the material, we've already created it for you. So you can download the PDF version, or you can email the Women's Center at theamericancollege.edu, and we can send you a PowerPoint that you can customize yourself. Additionally, we have letters to help advance gender parity, as well as to get more financial literacy at earlier ages. All of this information is backed by research. So one of them being our white paper around how the future client is female and advisors' perception of success. So like I mentioned, we'll make sure we drop in the chat, but this is an example of our toolkit and what it can provide for you and why it's so important in this industry. And lastly, before we go to our Q&A aspect, we do host monthly workshops. So we have Wednesdays with Women Working in Wealth, and this webcast is one of those in this series. So our next one is with Intentional Advisor, and this will be a practice management and help you along your way at your firms. And we're going to be talking about shame to service. Additionally, we keep this monthly cadence so that we can stay connected, and that's really what is important around building this sense of community. So we will leave this on the screen. We will pause here to make sure if there are any additional questions from our audience, if you can drop them in the QA functionality, that would be immensely helpful. And we are really excited and eager to help recruit, retain, and develop our financial professionals, including Gen Z talent, female talent, and all diverse talent.
So I think we answered most of the questions in the Q&A and the chat. If there's one last question before we wrap up, we would be happy to try to answer it. We thank you all for joining us today. The Center for Women at the American College of Financial Services. We look forward to connecting with you in the future at a future webcast, workshop, the summit. Lots of ways to engage with us. Please opt into our community so that we can keep you up to date on everything that's going on. Download the toolkit, check out our website, come back, send us a note, ask us a question. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Thank you to my colleagues, Lindsey Lewis and Kaylee Ranck. Thank you to our interns, Erin and Faith, who helped us with this. Hope you all have a great rest of your day and rest of your week. Thanks so much, everybody.